Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan Benson, your host of the Stay Rich Show. And today we are going to talk about something so controversial in 2025, and that is relationships. I'm a winning divorce strategist, an unbiased expert witness, a hero to my clients, and a villain to their exes. Welcome to the Stay Rich Show. You might think that relationships shouldn't be controversial. And I agree with you, they shouldn't be controversial. But let's face it, in today's environment, we know that high net worth successful men get really raked over the coals in divorce cases very often. We know that there's a lot of Me Too stuff happening out there, for better or worse. We know that there's unsubstantiated, completely fabricated things made up about men that are posted online and serve to destroy reputations after a breakup, right? So if you're a man in 2025, how do you navigate today's dating environment? How do you navigate the thought that you may want to be married one day, right? And I'm sure you've heard from so many people out there in the space, men should never get married. Marriage is a terrible thing for men. And honestly, I would argue against that. I think that marriage is a great thing in many cases, but as long as you know the stakes of marriage, as long as you know what you're getting into, and as long as you know that it is going to be beneficial, even considering the risk of divorce, it's going to be so beneficial that even in 10 years' time, if she decides to say F you and leave, you're still better off for the entire marriage as a whole. Right? But let's face it, especially for you high net worth guys, the law today rewards foresight and punishes naivety. Men who are builders of wealth, men who acquire wealth over time, do so with extreme skill and precision. But in a marriage or any relationship, the system that has rewarded them with wealth and accumulation can be turned around and used against them by taking away their property rights, by dismantling them in a very short period of time. Now, in the modern family law environment, whether it be in Canada or the United States or the United Kingdom, whatever the case may be, this environment is not built in favor for the higher earning spouse. And let's face it, in 90% of cases, the man is the higher earning spouse. Now, there are many reasons for that, and I can discuss those. But these systems are designed to ensure a redistribution of wealth. They're designed to ensure sufficient disclosure and parity between the parties. And really the only antidote to this, the only way to counteract this bias is through deliberate preemptive structuring ahead of time, right? And this comprehensive wealth protection strategy changes as your wealth level increases. It changes how your dynamics in a relationship change. If you're in a short-term relationship, obviously the risks are substantially different than if you're in a long-standing marriage, whether it comes to financial risk, emotional risk, legal risk. In a long relationship, those risks are substantially higher. Your reputational risk is huge. So you need to put contractual planning into this equation, which includes prenups, which includes postnups. If you're earlier on in the relationship, having a relationship agreement on what your relationship even is, having a cohabitation agreement if you happen to move into each other, structurally planning your assets over time, right? Putting them into corporations, putting them into the corporations into trusts, having insurance that pays out if there's a divorce, so then you can just cut a check and pay rather than having to dismantle your empire. And most importantly, this is missed all the time, is reputational protection. See, because in today's day and age, we live in an online world where one thing can destroy you. Now, if you work as a garbage man, your reputational risk is pretty low. Because if your ex goes out and starts firing into the wind on Instagram and X about how much of a piece of shit you are, it's probably not going to impact your job that much. It's just not. But if you're a successful, motivated entrepreneur with a public-facing role, this is going to have a huge impact on you if you go through a divorce and your ex is saying all kinds of things in public about how terrible you are and all the terrible things that you did and how you're a narcissist and a sociopath and emotionally abusive, and how, you like abuse your kids and all this other kind of stuff, it's going to destroy you. So reputational protection is now like at the pinnacle of this. I would say that you want this when you're entering into a relationship. If it starts to look like it's getting to be mid to long term, it's going to last for a while, this is the time. This is the time to put protection in place to ensure that your reputation is protected and to ensure that your livelihood is protected. And each layer of these mitigation tools basically addresses different classifications of risk, right? So it's looking at your legal, it's looking at your emotional, your financial risk, your reputational risk. And together, they're going to create a system that actually functions. Now, I often get this question from men going through various relationship issues, including divorces, where I recommend putting non-disclosure agreement, non-disparagement agreement up front right as the divorce starts. We're going to start on equal footing. We're going to start productively, and we're not going to talk shit about each other, especially not in public. But these systems, I get the question from guys, like, what's like the one size fits all? Like, isn't there just one thing that works? No. I want you to think about these elements like safety features in a car, okay? If you have ABS brakes, but no airbags, no seatbelt, no crumple zone, well, mind you, crumple zones can help or can hurt, no roll cage, no traction control, nothing else, right? But you have anti-lock brakes. Would you think to yourself, hey, this car is super safe? No. No. But if you went and shopped for a car and you're like, okay, it's got ABS, it's got lane thingy-majagger, and it's going to stop you from getting into car accidents because it has collision avoidance systems and all these other bells and whistles, it's going to really help. It's going to really help to mitigate the odds that you're going to be in a car accident in the first place. And if you were in a car accident, right, because nothing's completely preventative, it's going to mitigate the odds that you're really severely injured or die. This is the same thing. What you're doing is that you're installing safety features into your car, which is your life. And will it prevent you from getting into an accident? No, but it'll definitely help. And if you are in an accident, it's going to help to ensure that you're not fatally wounded or severely and permanently impaired as a result of it. It's going to help to mitigate these damages. Now, the biggest mistake that really successful men make is that they assume that some sort of intent or affection is going to override the default rules in divorce or in a relationship breakup. But family law is just a governance system that, unless you write your own set of rules, it's just the state comes in and applies what they think is best for the entire population. And if you want to argue about whether or not the state rules are good or bad, I highly recommend you do so by contacting someone in the government and complaining. And start a lobbying group if you want to do that. But I'm going to deal with issues as they are right now, and I'm not going to worry about how it should be. I'm just going to tell you how it is, right? And every single state has its own formulas for how property is divided, how equalization payments are made, how alimony is calculated, how child support is calculated. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of these things, but you can pretty much assume that half your stuff goes to her, half your stuff stays with you. You can pretty much assume that alimony payments and child support payments are going to be painful as hell unless you find a better way, right? And all of these jurisdictions are blind to who earned it. They're blind to who created it. They're blind to who sacrificed it. It's just designed to be an axe, and it goes bang. There you go. That's it. It's not to try to reward who did more, who did less. Let's have scales. Let's have some sort of arbitrary measurement system. They just go 50-50, kaboom, done. Doesn't matter. The state doesn't care. The judge doesn't care. That's the rule. The rule is your stuff gets cut in half, whether or not you like it. Right? And in my opinion, the really enlightened approach is to treat these relationships like joint ventures. Just like an entrepreneur, right? I want you to draft a shareholder agreement. This is the same thing as a relationship agreement. I'm responsible for doing these things. You're responsible for doing those things, right? If we were to break up, you're going to take this stuff. I'm going to take that stuff. Even though we're just in a long-term relationship. Maybe you bought a sofa together. I don't know. Maybe you're in business together. Maybe she actually helps you with the business. This is really helpful, right? And couples who have disparaging wealth levels should be documenting who owns what and what are the obligations and exit rules. This requires a lot of emotional maturity, by the way. It is not easy to do, but addressing these issues up front rather than on the back end helps to protect you. And it also helps to establish a real transparent relationship where the possibility for its success in the long run increases. So treat it like a joint venture. You're the majority shareholder, but she's a minority shareholder. She still has minority shareholder rights, which means that those rights need to be protected. So use the system to your advantage. So when am I going to do these things? For relationship agreements, when it starts getting more serious, that's when you want to get into a relationship agreement. That's when you want to formalize the expectations about your lifestyle, your roles, how you're going to financially sort of cooperate with one another. That's when these things are hashed out. Now, maybe not all of these provisions are going to be enforceable, but just the process of negotiating them in the first place, it helps to foster transparency and trust, and it gives you some sort of evidence of intent with respect to the relationship. They're really best suited for like those early days. Like once you're 6 months in and you realize, hey, this may be a long-term relationship prospect, this is the time to put in a relationship agreement. Someone can negotiate these things. And if later you decide to move in together, that's when you up the ante and you go to a cohabitation agreement. This is when you enter into this agreement to make sure that your rights are protected for your own property. Because in the US and in Canada, the system will put almost like semi-marital rights, either through unjust enrichment or constructive trust claims, onto the other party. And a cohab agreement is going to help to define property ownership. It's going to help to define debt responsibility, support expectations, and allow these couples who are living together, you and your girlfriend, to share life without some sort of automatic determination of assets being put together by the government. This is really important for guys who have been through divorce, who have been through situations that are hairy, and they want to make sure that they want to protect their assets, especially if they have children from their marriage previously, that they want to ensure that those assets go to their kids, as they should. Having a cohab agreement is a wonderful way to do this. Next, much before you tie the knot, that's when you have the prenup discussion. This is the foundational layer. I call it the feminist filtration system because it tends to weed out a lot of feminists when you propose this, but this is the feminist filtration system. This is weeding out this idea that you owe her everything. And you want to execute these early with full disclosure and independent counsel, which means that all of your stuff goes on the board. And you go, here's everything that I own. Here's all the debts that I have. Here's all the other stuff that's relevant to the case. And it comes up here. You have your lawyer draft it. You have her ensure that she retains independent legal counsel and doesn't waive a right to that. Ensure that she gets counsel no matter what. That should not be an issue. That's one of the best ways to pierce a prenup later, is that if she didn't have legal counsel, it's really easy just to go, throw it out. If you have under $1 million in net worth, a pretty concise prenup that limits spousal support, confirms separate property is probably good enough. So it just confirms that you keep your business, et cetera, and has some sort of different formula with respect to spousal support. As your wealth level rises, maybe it's between 1 and 5 or 10 million, then the complexity rises. You want to have different ways to value the business than just giving it to a business valuator. You'd want to have a preset formula. You'd want to have debt allocation there, and definitely want to have caps on spousal support and alimony. Over that, you want to coordinate these things with shareholder agreements, insurance, and trusts. And beyond 25 million, you're looking at multi-jurisdictional planning likely. Choice of different law clauses, arbitration, and confidentiality is essential, especially if you're high net worth, ultra high net worth, over $25 million. But I would even argue that at lower levels, having confidentiality and going through mandatory mediation and arbitration is really, really helpful. So let's say you go through this process, it's successful, everybody's happy. Postnup is what you introduce after the marriage has happened. It's essentially a prenup, but it's happened after the goose has been proverbially cooked. And this is critical when there's any major changes. So if there's like a huge new wealth or some sort of substantial risk that has entered the picture, that's when you throw a postnup into the equation. So let's say you're inheriting a lot of money. Let's say, a new business venture has taken off and is immensely successful. that's when you want to have the discussion about a postnup, right? And you want to focus on translating really unpredictable future numbers and obligations into fixed and measurable things, which means that you can set aside a business and exchange it for you keep the house. You can set aside the inheritance as long as you don't commingle a bunch of stuff and make sure that you're protected, that the inheritance goes to who it was truly meant to, which is you. It's not meant to go to your wife necessarily. Maybe it's meant to go to your kids. And you want to give fixed, measurable numbers. You want to take away all this ambiguity. You want to replace it with just contractual certainty, especially for recovering from infidelity. A postnup with some sort of reconciliation consideration and very well structured confidentiality clauses can serve as a deterrent to future infidelity for you and also can serve as a reset button. It's legally binding, like this emotional recommitment to the relationship for her. Now, NDAs and non-disparagement clauses are key. I would say that you want to get into it. If you're thinking about a relationship agreement, you should be thinking about NDA and non-disparagement clause. In the 2025 world where one viral thing that goes online with enough people can land you in extremely hot water, having a non-disclosure agreement in place is critical. Having a non-disparagement clause within the NDA is indispensable. These things prevent the weaponization and leverage of your private information as reason to receive a payout. It stops emotional blackmail. It stops blackmail by imposing reputational risk. It helps you to preserve your brand identity in a world where personal branding is hugely, hugely important. Now, these clauses belong in business contracts. They're in business contracts all the time, but I would say, why aren't they in personal relationships? It doesn't seem like there's been a huge thrust towards this in the world, yet this is probably the biggest risk to a huge number of people out there. We all talk about prenups, but nobody talks about non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreements. It's insane, right? And you want this to restrict the dissemination of any financial, sexual, medical, business data, carving out things for legal and therapeutic disclosure only. But beyond that, your story, your life should not be gossip at the local Starbucks after hot yoga, okay? Your story should not be gossip online. Your story should not be gossip for anybody. Divorces are hard enough. The last thing you need to be encountering is gossip that destroys your business, that destroys your personal reputation. You can never get it back. Now, you want to include enforcement mechanisms that are tiered with liquidated damages and that sort of thing, holdbacks, arbitration. Really, the wealthier that you are, the greater the value of these things is. And again, if you're working as a garbage truck man, which is a great job, you probably don't need to have an NDA or a non-disparagement agreement. But if you're going through a divorce, it wouldn't hurt to introduce that. I want you guys entering into relationships in 2025 confidently. I want you entering into relationships with the framework that you have the ability to succeed, that you have the ability to protect yourself from the wide variety of risks out there, which means taking action now, which means putting these agreements into place, contractualizing your romantic arrangements to ensure honesty, openness, and transparency, which in turn will increase the ability or the chance that the relationship will actually thrive in the long run. And if it doesn't, if you have to pull the plug, if she has to pull the plug, it limits the damages, it limits your risk, and ensures that you are able to exit the relationship as quickly as possible, as inexpensively as possible, keeping all your shit to the extent that you can and as amicably as possible through the process. That's for now. If you want more information, make sure you go on to Amazon, buy my book, How the Rich Get Divorced, and stay rich. And until next time, stay rich.